There's something nobody tells you about compound interest. There's a minimum, a floor, an amount below which compounding basically does nothing for you. And most people are investing below it right now without even knowing. You've probably seen the charts, the ones that show a tiny investment turning into hundreds of thousands of dollars over decades. And maybe you looked at your own account, ran the same math, and thought, wait, that doesn't match. You're doing everything right. You're saving, you're consistent, but the numbers just aren't moving the way the charts promised they would. That's not a coincidence. That's a math problem nobody wants to talk about because it's uncomfortable. Today, we're going to talk about it. We're going to look at the real numbers, the actual thresholds, and why your monthly contribution amount matters more than almost anything else in the early stages of building wealth. So, leave a like and try to guess in the comments what that figure is. Let's start with something simple. Compound interest is real. It works. It's not a scam, but here's what the charts always leave out. Compounding has a size problem. The smaller your starting amount, the longer it takes before compounding starts doing anything meaningful. And meaningful is the key word here. Say you put $50 into an index fund earning an average of 8% per year. At the end of 12 months, you made $4. $4. You probably spent more on the coffee you drank while checking your portfolio. Now, yes, technically your money compounded, the math worked, but the output is so small it's invisible in your daily life. And here's where people get confused. They hear, start small, be consistent, and they interpret that as even $10 a month will eventually make you rich. In theory, sure. In practice, you might be 90 years old before it matters. The uncomfortable truth is that there's a contribution threshold, a minimum monthly amount below which compounding feels completely invisible for the first 10 to 15 years. And if you hit that wall and don't understand what's happening, you quit. You stop investing. You figure the whole thing was overhyped. That's the real problem. Not that compounding doesn't work. It does. But if you're below the threshold, the early years feel completely pointless. And humans aren't wired to keep doing something that feels pointless. So, what is the threshold? Let's actually run the numbers instead of just talking about them in vague terms. According to data from the S&P 500's historical average, a realistic long-term annual return for a diversified index fund is around 7%. Let's use 8% to be conservative. If you invest $50 per month at 8% annually, after 5 years, roughly $3,600. After 10 years, roughly $9,200. After 20 years, roughly $29,500. After 30 years, roughly $74,500. $74,000 after 30 years of consistent investing. That's not nothing. But let's be honest, it's not retirement money either, not in most parts of the world. Now, let's jump to $200 per month. Same 8% return, same time frames. After 5 years, roughly $14,700. After 10 years, roughly $36,800. After 20 years, roughly $117,800. After 30 years, roughly $298,000. Now we're talking nearly $300,000. After 30 years from $200 a month, that's starting to look like something real. And at $400 per month, after Lima years, roughly $29,300. After 10 years, roughly $73,700. After 20 years, roughly $235,600. After 30 years, roughly $595,000. That's close to $600,000 from $400 a month. Over 30 years, same interest rate every single time. The only thing that changed was the monthly contribution. Here's what this tells us. The interest rate is almost irrelevant in the early stages. What matters most is how much you're putting in every month. Your contributions are doing the heavy lifting for the first decade or more. The compounding only becomes the dominant force once your account balance is big enough to generate meaningful returns on its own. Think about it this way. 8% of $10,000 is $800. 8% of $100,000 is $8,000. Same percentage, but $8,000 feels real. $800 doesn't change your life. This is also why wealthy people seem to get richer without trying that hard. It's not magic, and it's not luck. It's science. Someone with $500,000 invested at 7% earns $35,000 a year from returns alone without doing a single thing. Without showing up to work, just from the balance being large enough for the percentage to matter. Meanwhile, someone with $5,000 invested at 7% earns $350 a year. That's not even a car payment. The gap between these two people isn't intelligence. It isn't even discipline necessarily. It's the size of the pile they're compounding on. So the real question isn't, should I invest? The real question is, how do I get my pile big enough, fast enough, for compounding to actually start working in a way I can feel? And the answer to that comes in two parts. Part 1. Your contributions in the early years matter more than your returns. Let that sink in. You could chase higher risk investments hoping for 15 or 20% returns, but even if you hit that, the math barely moves when your balance is small. A 15% return on $2,000 is $300. Meanwhile, adding an extra $300 a month to your contributions does the exact same thing and doesn't require you to take on any extra risk. Part 2. The threshold that actually starts making compounding feel real. The point where you start to notice your money growing without you feeding it is somewhere around $100,000 to $150,000 in total invested assets. At $100,000 earning 8%, you're making $8,000 a year from returns alone. That's when people start to feel it. That's when the snowball metaphor actually starts making sense. So, the real goal in your early years isn't just to invest consistently. It's to get to $100,000 as fast as responsibly possible. Because that's the number where compounding shifts from being a background process you can barely see to being something that actually accelerates your wealth on its own. Let's also talk about something called the contribution versus return split, because this is where most beginner investors make the wrong bet. A lot of people, when they realize their returns feel small, assume the problem is that they're not getting a high enough return. So they start chasing, they move money into higher risk stocks, crypto, speculative plays. They think, if I could just get 15% instead of 8%, things would change. But let's run that math, because numbers don't lie. If you were investing $200 a month and you somehow double your return from 8% to a numbless percent over 10 years at 8%, roughly $36,800 at a numbless percent, roughly $52,200. That's about $15,000 more. Not bad, but to achieve 16% consistently, you need to take on significantly more risk. The kind that can wipe out half your portfolio in a bad year. And that volatility often causes people to sell at the wrong time and lock in losses. Now, what happens if instead of chasing high returns, you increase your monthly contribution from $200 to $350 at 8%, $350 per month at 8% over 10 years, roughly $64,000. More money, less risk, same time frame? The contribution increase beat the return increase every single time when starting from small amounts. This is the core realization. In the early years, you are your own best investment, putting energy into earning more, spending less, and increasing your monthly contribution will outperform chasing high return investments almost every time. Not because high returns are bad. They're great when they happen, but because the math of compounding at small balances is dominated by input, not rates. There's also a psychological piece to this that I think deserves attention. When your investment account grows by $40 in a month from returns, and you put in $200, the account grew $240, you feel like you did 83% of the work. And you did. But if you keep doing that month after month, year after year, the math starts to shift. At $50,000 invested, an 8% annual return gives you $333 a month from returns alone. Now you're doing maybe 40% of the work. At $100,000, you're making $667 a month from returns. The split keeps shifting, and eventually the investment is doing more work than you are. But you only get there by grinding through the phase where it doesn't feel like that. That's the part people give up on. They don't see the split shifting. They don't feel the momentum building, but it's building every single month. You just have to trust the math long enough to see it. Here's the moment most financial content skips past because it's not glamorous enough. The path to real compounding wealth has two phases, and almost nobody talks about them as two separate things. Phase 1 is what I'd call the contribution phase. This is the grind. This is where you're the engine. Your savings rate, your income growth, your ability to cut expenses and redirect money into investments. This is what drives your growth. Returns are almost irrelevant here because the numbers are still too small. If you're putting in $300 a month and you get a 9% return instead of 8%, that difference over 10 years is less than $5,000. Barely noticeable. But if you increase your monthly contribution from $300 to $500, that same 10 years produces an extra $15,000 or more. Your behavior is the variable that matters most right now. Phase 2 is the compounding phase. This is where the math starts running ahead of you. This is where your returns begin to outpace your contributions. This is where people start saying things like, "My investments made more last year than I earned at my job." It feels like a switch flips, but it's not a switch. It's a threshold. And that threshold, based on historical market data, tends to hit somewhere between $100,000 and $200,000, depending on your return rate and how much you're still contributing. The fastest way to get there isn't to find a higher return investment, it's to aggressively grow your monthly contribution amount. That's it. That's the secret that's hiding in plain sight. If you're currently investing $100 a month, the math is going to feel invisible for a long, long time. Here's the realistic picture. At 8% returns over 10 years, you'll have about $18,400. That's real money. But it's not the kind of number that makes you feel financially free. It's not even 1 year of most people's living expenses. But if you find a way through extra work, cutting costs, growing your income, selling things you don't need to get that monthly amount up to $500, the 10-year picture changes to $91,000. Still working towards that threshold, but now you can see it. You're close. And at $1,000 per month, you're at $184,000 after 10 years. You've crossed the threshold. Compounding is now doing work you can actually see. This is not about shaming anyone who can only afford $50 a month. Life is expensive, budgets are real, but it is about being honest that the impact of those contributions in the short term is going to feel That's not a sign you're doing it wrong. That's just math. The key mindset shift is this. Stop thinking of compound interest as the strategy. Think of it as the reward. The strategy is contribution growth, getting more money into the account every month, every year, as aggressively as your life allows. Compound interest is what happens after you've done the hard part. Let's bring this together. The numbers are clear. At $50 a month, you're in this for the very long game. At $200 to $500 a month, you start seeing real momentum within a decade. At $1,000 or more per month, you cross the $100,000 threshold in under 10 years, and compounding begins doing heavy lifting you can actually feel. So, here's what to do with this information. Look at your current monthly contribution. Ask yourself honestly, what would it take to increase it by even $50 this month? Not forever, not to some impossible number, just $50 more. Because $50 extra per month over 20 years at 8% return is an additional $29,400 from one small decision. Then ask the same question next month and the month after. Grow that number slowly, consistently, the same way compound interest grows your balance. Small increases done repeatedly over time add up to something you can barely imagine right now. Let's also talk about what this looks like In real life, if you make $3,000 a month after tax and you're currently investing $150, that's 5% of your income. A solid start, but if you can get that to $300, even if it means cutting something from your budget, a subscription, eating out less, delaying a purchase, you've doubled your contribution. And we've already seen what doubling your contribution does to the long-term numbers. It doesn't just improve them, it nearly doubles them. The key is treating your investment contribution like a fixed bill, not as whatever's left over at the end of the month, because what's left over at the end of the month is almost always nothing. You spend up to your income. Almost everyone does. The only way to reliably save more is to move the money out before you ever see it. Set up an automatic transfer on the same day you get paid. Pay your future self first. And as your income grows through raises, promotions, side work, anything, increase your contribution automatically. Don't inflate your lifestyle to match your income, or at least don't inflate it all the way. Take half of every raise and put it into investments. Your lifestyle still gets better. Your future gets built. Both things happen at once. This is how people go from feeling like compounding is a myth to feeling like it's the most powerful force in their financial life. Not because they discovered some secret, but because they stayed consistent long enough and invested enough each month for the math to actually reveal itself. You don't need to get rich overnight. You just need to stay in the game long enough for the math to finally tip in your favor. That's when things start compounding. Not just your money, but your confidence, your discipline, and your financial freedom. This journey is slow at first, and that's okay. It's supposed to be. Think long, stay steady, invest more every chance you get. And one last thing before you go. Don't compare your chapter 1 to someone else's chapter 15. The person showing off their portfolio that's making thousands a month in returns. They had years of boring, invisible, frustrating growth before that happened. You just didn't see that part. Social media shows you the result. It never shows you the decade of consistent contributions when nothing felt like it was working. The only way to get to phase 2 is to commit fully to phase 1. No shortcuts, no exceptions, no giving up when the numbers feel too small to matter, because they do matter. They're adding up every single month, whether you feel it or not. Every dollar you invest today is doing quiet, invisible work that you won't be able to see until later. Trust the math. Stay in the game. And be patient with yourself, because this is a long road and almost no one talks about how slow the beginning really is. If this changed how you think about your money, subscribe and check the link below. I have a free community where I help you build real wealth. I'll see you in the next one.